I'm Leon Golson, Program Director for the Midwest AIDS Prevention Project. I've been with MAP for 13 years, providing HIV prevention for the state of Michigan. I have been living with my HIV infection for 16 years now. My job helps up my infection, and the fact that I'm infected helps inspire me to do my job. You would think engaging in unprotected sex would be scary enough to get most people tested, but it's not. What freaked me out enough was when I woke up one morning with oral thrush, and that prompted me to go and get tested for HIV. I, at that time, had been engaging in unprotected sex, and that's what led to my infection. I kind of shut down emotionally and just got numb and just went about my business of going to work. At the time, I was with a partner out of school and working, and just going to work and coming home and just kind of going on automatic pilot for about 2 weeks. At the end of about 2 weeks, I started to feel and think everything about the fact that I was HIV positive. And I entertained suicide for maybe a millisecond. I opted not to go that route because basically I'm a chicken when it comes to pain. I don't handle pain well at all. So cutting my wrist or throwing myself out of a window would hurt. So I wasn't willing to go that route. And that left me with dealing with my infection and how I was going to deal with it. And at that time, particularly in the city of Detroit, there wasn't nearly as much support and help there is now. So it was probably one of the most difficult times I had with my infection, because I was also going to a number of very close friends' funerals who I graduated with, who had also died of this infection. Didn't really know how I was going to go about telling my partner and my family. Those two conversations scared me, and of course, I played out the worst case scenario in my head on how they would react to my positive status. So I decided to just go with what I used as a tactic of dealing with other difficult conversations, and that was just putting it out there and waiting to see what would happen. So it was just a quiet evening. I started with my partner. It's just the two of us sitting there watching TV, and I just kind of blurted it out and just braced myself for that worst case scenario, which did not play out. So that kind of helped me calm down and say, okay, this, obviously my partner's concerned, but wasn't as bad as I thought the reaction was going to be. So we were able to talk, and that was very helpful and very healing to the both of us. So I got past that initial conversation and kind of went, okay, that wasn't too bad. Didn't have to think about my previous partners, because there was, of course, a history there. And I contacted them as best I could and let them know I was infected. And they all told me they were fine. Now, whether that was the truth or not, I don't know for sure. But I did my part. I put the information out there. Again, very difficult conversations to have, because that's a phone call you don't usually expect to get out the blue. But went through those conversations. And since they didn't play out as bad as I thought they were, that just helped fuel my courage for the big one, and that was with my family. I had to figure out another tactic on how to tell my mother. That's what I wanted to start with. We come from Alabama. I was born in a little town called Otagoville, Alabama, and we come from some very, very scary Baptist upbringing. So I've heard the fire, brimstone sermons in the whole 9 yards. And I'm my mother's only son, so that to keep me in line, my mother would say little things like, Leon, if anything ever happened to you, it'll just kill me. I couldn't deal with it if anything ever happens to you. So I'm like, okay. So I had to figure out how to tell my mother I'm infected and not get the sermon from her, or, cause her to have cardiac arrest. So I decided I'd educate her. So I took what information I had at the time about HIV and AIDS to her house. We lived about 10 minutes apart at that time, and sat down with her and went through this little education segment. And she didn't ask anything of me personally. She just asked about the virus. And I said, okay, well, why don't you keep this information, go through it, and I'll call you in a few days, see if you have any questions. 2 weeks went by at my kitchen sink, and I'm washing my dishes, and I'm thinking to myself, I'll call my mother up now, tell her I'm infected. The education's, had time to sink in. So just as I turn from the sink to reach for the phone, it rings, and it's my mother on the other end. She goes, Leon. I go, yes, ma'am. She goes, are you infected with HIV? Excuse me. And I go, yeah, I was just about to call and tell you that. And that's just how that conversation started. And her reaction wasn't what she promised it would be. She was very supportive, non-judgmental, just full of love and compassion. And during the course of our conversation, she asked if I wanted my sisters to know. I said, yeah, you can go ahead and tell them. I said, do you want your father to know? We kind of both went, uh-oh. We decided not to tell him. We decided to wait until we absolutely had to deal with that. Because my father was very abusive to my mother and us as we were coming up, as we were younger. So we expected that that's how he would handle that information, very abusively. So we decided not to tell him. Well, as the fates would have it, um, I end up having to talk to him about that a lot sooner than I was expecting. I was expecting to disclose the fact that I was positive moments before I was ready to die of this infection. It didn't work out that way. I did a TV commercial some years back for the state health department here in Michigan, speaking as a person who's infected with HIV, and that's how my father found out. So his sister actually saw the commercial and called him up. So the telephone grapevine kicked in, and there was a message on my phone: Leon, your father knows you're infected, you better call him up. So I braced myself to be disowned and all of that stuff, and called my father up, holding the phone away from my ear, because he likes to scream usually. And I said, Dad, I heard you found out I'm infected. And I just kind of closed my eyes and braced myself. And he's like, yeah, how you doing? Do you need anything? You've been taking care of yourself? You need money for medication? And that just kind of blew me away, because my father's not one to donate money. And it just kind of took me by surprise, because I kept wondering where was my real father. But that's for whatever reasons, that kind of touched him. During the course of our conversation, he kept asking, why am I just finding out after all this time? And I told him, because you're not the easiest person in the world to talk to about anything. He got real quiet for a few moments behind that remark. And then we finished our conversation. And from that day on, he was a lot nicer, and continues to be a lot nicer to be around. So it actually, the fact that I disclosed my status to my family had the opposite effect. It brought us closer together versus tearing us apart, which is what I thought for sure is what would happen. The stigmas that I've had to deal with regards to my HIV infection came about when it comes to personal, intimate relationships. It wasn't a matter of being fired from a job or anything like that, because I've been fortunate enough to work in HIV work, so that kind of cancels out, or it should cancel out, any work discrimination. But when it comes to intimate relationships, before I got into the long-term relationship I'm in now, whenever I disclose my status, which is one of the things that I made a habit of doing right off the bat when I met someone with intentions of starting a relationship, I met with a lot of rejection. And that was a very hurtful and very sobering thing to have to deal with on a continuous basis. But eventually I kind of adapted the mindset that, well, their loss, somebody else's gain, I hope. But that is probably one of the most scarier things to have to consider as someone who's HIV positive, and as a person who has decided to be proactive with their infection versus reactive. Because once you've decided to be proactive, all those desires to be with someone, to be touched, to be sexually active, or what have you, come back into play. So you have to sit there and you have to think, now, how do you share this information? If you have the mindset to share it, because unfortunately there are people out there who won't share this information. You have to think how you're going to handle that rejection, because it's going to happen, it's going to come. And hopefully you have some type of healthy coping mechanism to deal with it. Hopefully you don't feed in any self-destructive behaviors to deal with that type of rejection, because it can be very devastating. It's a constant reminder of the fact that I am HIV positive. Even now, I'm in a relationship that's 7 years old. There are points where my partner isn't necessarily physically comfortable with me, and that's cause for some blue Mondays, as I call them. But we try and talk and get through those as best we can. But it's something that I will constantly have to struggle with for the remainder of my life.